Hey guys, Jason here, and today I'm wanting to talk about something with UFC 157, Ronda Rousey versus Liz Carmouche. Alright, so I'm not really talking about all the fights on the card. I'm going to be talking about an issue of the fight, and it's a fairly obvious issue. This is the first ever UFC card that will be featuring a women's MMA bout. This MMA bout is between the bantamweight UFC champion Ronda Rousey. She became bantamweight UFC champion after the UFC absorbed all the Strikeforce fighters, since the UFC did not have a women's division at the time, or a women's bantamweight division even more specifically. Her Strikeforce belt turned into the UFC belt, so this will really be her first ever UFC title fight, even though she's defended her Strikeforce belt before. But, alright, so to the point of this, there's some controversy about women's MMA being added to the UFC. Many people are being ignorant to this and saying that women's MMA does not belong in the UFC because the UFC is the elite level of fighting. And I'm really not seeing this. I don't understand why people are so against women's MMA. I understand sometimes women's sports are not as enjoyable to watch as men's sports. There are exceptions. There are some sports where women's sports are easily just as good as men's sports. I actually think MMA is one of them. Now, for many sports, for example, I think women's soccer and women's basketball can be dreadfully boring in comparison to men's basketball and men's soccer. It happens. That's just the nature of those games, and the nature of women naturally being physically less strong and athletic as men are. It happens. But in MMA, I feel since they are both evenly matched, they are the same size and weight as each other, it's less of a factor that they aren't as athletic as men because they're fighting against each other. They only have to be as fast as each other to be competitive. They are still both very technical fighters and should be able to provide an entertaining bout. And pretty much all the previous women's MMA bouts that I have watched, I have found very entertaining. So this is what I'm going to say. The naysayers that say, oh, it's women, it's not going to be good because the women, they're not as strong, they're not as fast as the men. Well, you probably have never watched a women's MMA bout. And if you have watched it, you probably didn't watch it with an open mind. You thought, oh, this is going to suck from the very beginning. Or, oh, I could beat these women because they're women, they're weaker, I'm a man, I'm strong. Well, I got some news for you. Your average Joe is going to get beat up by Ronda Rousey or Liz Carmouche or many other professional women's MMA fighters. There's a lot more to fighting than just being big, bad, and strong. There's a lot of technique. There's a lot of strategy that unless you train MMA, you do not know about. So average Joe on the street, Ronda Rousey would judo throw an armbar within 15-30 seconds, in my opinion. Now, I mean, there's some people that are criticizing the UFC for even smaller men's weight classes, and that's even more ridiculous in my opinion because these guys could easily beat you up still. And it doesn't matter that Ronda Rousey cannot beat any UFC men's fighter because she's not fighting against a man. Just like Ben Henderson is not going to beat Cain Velasquez. If they fought, Cain Velasquez would toss Ben Henderson around like a rag doll, and it wouldn't even be a fun fight. But Ben Henderson is a lightweight, and Cain Velasquez is a heavyweight for a reason. That's why there are weight classes. That's why there's a women's division. That's why the women's division has weight classes. So I do not think there's going to be anything wrong with this fight, and I think it will be entertaining. However, I do think it's a very bold move from the UFC to decide to make the women's division, the women's title fight, a headlining fight. That is an extremely bold decision, and I think I mean, it's not all. I mean, it's not wrong that they're doing it, but you have to understand some people might not be as excited for this fight as, say, the co-main event, Lyoto Machida versus Dan Henderson, who, in my opinion, are easily much bigger names and much more established fighters that normally would be on a main event status. But Ronda Rousey and Liz Carmouche have been given the main event. Now, if you follow MMA closely, you know who Ronda Rousey is, but not everyone's going to know Liz Carmouche. I think anybody that follows MMA closely knows Lyoto Machida and Dan Henderson. Both of these guys are top-notch fighters. Lyoto Machida is a former UFC champion, and he's had a very good record before joining the UFC. Dan Henderson is a former Pride champion, Strikeforce champion, and he is a middleweight tournament winner for the UFC as well. I mean, these guys are legends, or legends in the making for the sport of MMA. And I mean, Ronda Rousey is a very big name at the moment. She's managed her Strikeforce belt, which has been turned into the. But Liz Carmouche isn't near as famous. So, I mean, to be fair, I think Lyoto Machida versus Dan Henderson should be the headliner, and Rousey Carmouche should be the co-main event. However, being a title fight, I do understand how they gave that main event status. But, alright, back to my overall message. You should not be turned off by women's MMA. Women's MMA, it's a good thing. It's here to stay, and I hope it goes nowhere. If you are so against women's MMA that you're considering not watching, not ordering the pay-per-view for UFC 157, well, this is my opinion. Don't order it. Don't watch it. It's not going to hurt the UFC. The UFC is probably going to make more money from adding a new group of fans to their current fan base. So, UFC doesn't need you. You can go watch something else. Go watch professional wrestling or some other MMA promotion. I think the future, women's MMA will be here to stay. I don't think you're ever going to see an entirely UFC women's bouts. You're always going to see it like this. It's going to be 90% men, 1 to 2 maximum women's bouts. So, I mean, even then, if you're really that against watching Ronda Rousey and Liz Carmouche fight, watch the rest of the fights. There's plenty of other good fights on the card. I mean, we already talked about Lyoto Machida, Dan Henderson. There's Uriah Faber, Ivan Minyavar. Apologize for the name pronunciation. Court McGee versus Josh Neer. Josh Koscheck versus Robbie Lawyer. And then on the prelims, we have some decent fights. Brendan Schaub, LeVar Johnson, Michael Chiesa, and Anton Kovanen. And plenty of good fights. I mean, I don't like every fight on every card of the UFC. I don't think anyone loves every fight on any card of any event. So if you don't like it, you don't have to watch that one. But don't be talking crap about it and saying, oh, it's terrible, it's the end of the UFC, it's the end of this. Women's MMA, it's here to stay. I personally think it's a great thing, and I'm looking forward to the fight. I probably am looking forward to Lyoto Machida, Dan Henderson more, as I find that to be a more competitive matchup. I kind of doubt Liz Carmouche can even make it out of the first round before having her arm cranked off. However, it would be interesting if Ronda Rousey could win in a different fashion, but she's kind of shown that the armbar is her thing, and she knows how to get it if she wants it. So, prediction for that, easy prediction. Armbar victory for Ronda Rousey. Lyoto Machida, Dan Henderson, much more of a toss of that one. I think could go either way. I'm favoring Machida by a little bit. That's it. Alright guys, that's my spiel for UFC 157. I'll see you next time. Bye.